Here I was, given command of Western Air Command and asked to control and conduct the ops. None of our bombs caused any damage to our own forces, be it equipment or personnel. You know, I'm quite proud of what we were able to achieve with so little and under conditions which were not good for air action. And we got handheld GPS. We used that little children fun onto our aircraft, fixed them onto our cockpit and said, all right, let's go. We are now ops. We lost 3 aircraft and we lost 5 air warriors. Of course it happens in war, but it does not detract from the sorrow that one feels at a premature loss of life. And that sorrow has always remained with me. In early May, there were news that something was happening in the high heights of the Kargil sector. And when we did our little checks, the army found that there were some interlopers who were there on our side. You see, when you use air, the danger is that the other side will also use air. And you should be ready then to be able to accept damages. If you are not willing to accept damages, there will be a problem. On the other hand, if you don't use air, then the position that the enemy had occupied, they would continue to occupy, and that is not something that we would accept. So during most of May, this little debate was going on as to whether air should be used or not used. And our insistence that we will use it only, our many Air Force insistence that we will use it only with clearance from the government played its part. So we got the clearance on the 24th and 25th morning we were on. Before this, what we had done is that we had done the sensible things like carry out checks, procedures, do other sensible things like photography, use the cameras. And so it's either on the 19th or 20th that one camera got shot down. The missile, Paki missile, lodged itself in one of the engines of the Canberra, but the Canberra landed. And 3 days later, it was fit and fine and it took off again. We were quite convinced those days that Pakistan capability was at a low ebb. And the fact that this Canberra had been hit by a missile, obviously the missile's capability was askance. The net result is that our thinking that Pak capability was at a low ebb was magnified. Anyway, when the chief told me that we were through and I could launch, this was a day earlier. But he says, you cannot go on to the other side and neither any of your projectiles will go on to the other side. I said, okay, because quite frankly, these little targets that were there, which were barely visible, to try and attack them from the air was a little tricky. Firstly, you couldn't see them. So it was just not feasible, given the small size of the targets. And at that time it was suggested, and unfortunately I agreed, that we will use helicopters also. So the fighter aircraft started off. Helicopters also came in. The reason for the helicopters is they are at a lower speed. Because they are at a lower speed, they can come a little closer, and as they come a little closer, they will be able to see that much better. Plus, these helicopters that we were using were armed with 64 rockets each. Now that is a considerable amount of rocket power. This is a normal helicopter which was, rocket pods had been fitted and rockets were inside the pod. It is not an armed helicopter. It is a helicopter with armament, if I can make that distinction, because we didn't have anything else. We did have the Mi-25 and the Mi-35, but at those altitudes they could not operate. But on the second day, when one helicopter got shot down, I decided that that's it, no more helicopters. In fact, I think that the choice of the use of helicopters was faulty, my fault. So all in all, in the first 2 days, we had lost 3 aircraft, and at that stage we said, now let's sit back, consider and rethink. What did we do? First, the requirement was no helicopters. No helicopters in an offensive attack mode. In fact, helicopters did something like 2,000 odd sorties during the Kargil ops. They did sterling work, but away from the front line. The second decision that was taken, and I think very wisely, was that we will not come below the height, the effective height of enemy surface-to-air missiles, which meant that the lowest that we will approach the target would be at 8,000 feet above target height. Now this made it even more difficult. How do we attack something which is 8,000 feet above target height? You appreciate the fact that if we are that sort of height, then these small little targets will be almost impossible to see. It was not possible. So we came to another conclusion which said that we will do medium level bombing, which meant at a height which is 8,000 feet above the target height, we will fly level towards the target and use GPS to tell us as to when we should release the bomb. We had only one squadron, 17th Squadron, that had the GPS inbuilt, which was as a factory-fitted GPS. But there were other aircraft that we were using. So we did some very rapid purchase, and we got handheld GPS, which were then just coming out into the market, and they were being used by little children for fun. We used that little children fun onto our aircraft, fixed them onto our cockpit, and said, all right, let's go. Such like invention or system had not been tried by us. And if there is a certain novelty, the difficulty in the novelty is that there are many people who say, what nonsense, what are you doing? How can you hit anything from that sort of a height in medium level bombing? Any number of people, air marshals who I had great respect for, asked me, Vinod, what are you doing? And my answer was always, what would you expect me to do otherwise? And to which they had little answer. We had to introduce a large number of innovations to be able to make our attacks a little more effective. One, photographs that we were getting were very old, and they did not give us the information that we wanted. So we said, can't we do something and take photographs ourselves? So one bright spark, he went up into the air with a small video camera. He videographed the target area. Now do appreciate that even if we found no target, that was intelligence. The intelligence meaning that there is no target, look elsewhere. Second is that we had used the MiG-25, which were then still in service, these MiG-25s were supposed to fly at 20 kilometers height, 60,000 feet, at Mach 2 or thereabouts, and then take photos. But they were not good enough for us, because what we wanted was to be able to discern where is the target, so that we know exactly where it is and we can target it accordingly. We took a clear decision that we will get them to fly lower, and we will get them to fly lower at, say, 8,000 feet above ground. A little dangerous, but by now we said, let's do it and see what happens. And when we got them a little lower, we found that now the photographs that came were good and we could make use of them. Unfortunately, all the targets that we saw there were our own. And we can understand this because our forces were out in the open. The enemy forces were dug in behind sangars. Sangars are big boulders. And they were not really visible. And everything in any case was white. Little difficult. But there is a system that we adopted. When there was some photograph that came our way, we would pass this on to the army, and the army would tell us, yes, it is ours, or no, it is not ours, you can go ahead and shoot. Please appreciate that in these hilly terrains, if the targets were close to the hilltops, if there was an overshoot, then it would go many miles overshoot, because it will go down that so. And that will go against my briefing. No projectile across the LC. The attacks took place. We would inquire from the ground, those army units that were able to see where the target was, or the purported target was, as to what was the result. And in 70–80% of the cases, the answer we got was bombs on target. So that made you feel happy. And the second, I say it with immense pride, probably this was the only example where air action was done against enemy forces in close proximity to our forces, very close proximity to our forces, where there was not even one blue on blue kill. None of our bombs caused any damage to our own forces, be it equipment or personnel. So that is something which I say, and this is the only example in the history of aerial warfare. And, well, it happened during Kargil Ops, during Safed Sagar. We had a system at all stages that whenever we were using strike aircraft, they were supported by escort forces, unless it was the Mirages that were doing the attacks. If the Mirages were doing the attack, then they had the capability to be escorts themselves. But when the Mirages got more and more into it, and we got two other gadgets available to us, one was the Winton pod. The Winton pod was Israeli, and it was in India because we were testing it and evaluating it. So we got to use it, and the Winton pod had two things in it. One is it would give us a 10-time magnification. And secondly, there was a system by which we could lace the target. And with a small attachment to a bomb, the bomb would then home on to the laced position. Laced in laser hit position. That was one innovation that we got in. That the Mirage aircraft, they had a system by which inbuilt capability for accuracy in air-to-ground work. So they were good that way. And one good day, we found a target which we thought was on our side of the LC. We asked the army, they said yes, it is on our side and it is not ours, so you are at liberty to attack. And we did. This was Muntalalo. Very much so, because this was their logistic and admin dump. And in one clear swoop, 4 Mirage aircraft flattened it. And from then onwards, we started hearing, खाना नहीं है, कुछ और मिल नहीं रहा, ये हवाई जहाज आते जाते हैं, हम क्या करें? All these sub stories from the other side, they started to come in, and from then onwards it was a relatively easy street. The Vinton pod was used to great advantage in the celebrated attack on Tiger Hill, and it was a very successful attack. And well, all in all, at one point in time, they just had no other choice but to say, we agree to disengage. Much in the same way as what happened recently in Operational Sindoor. Operational Sindoor was a replay of what had taken place in Kargil. You know, I'm quite proud of what we were able to achieve with so little and under conditions which were not good for air action. This much, yes, when we were attacking, we had to get clearance from the army. Is it okay? Target is so and so. And they would say yes. We would ask them what time should we attack, because they had to ensure that their troops were not within the line of sight. So this pattern that we adopted worked very well. Not a single position. Each one of them we were able to attack before the army got into position. What I remember is this. Here I was given command of Western Air Command and asked to control and conduct the ops as I saw fit. And here I must tell you, people kept telling me do this or do that, but they did not interfere. They were more recommendatory rather than saying do this. So what took place was my pigeon. Having got this, I must say that I was singularly fortunate to have good staff. You need staff because you need their advice, but equally importantly, you need the sort of staff that will take your directions, take them to heart, and go ahead and meet the requirements. In all these cases, whether in the field or in my staff in headquarters, I was singularly fortunate to have such like people available. But you cannot but lose sight of the fact that we lost 3 aircraft and we lost 5 air warriors. Of course it happens in war, but it does not detract from the sorrow that one feels at a premature loss of life. And that sorrow has always remained with me. It is a sorrow that it happened.